He thought his suit cost more than her life. He thought his bank account gave him the right to treat people like furniture. Julian Thorne, the ruthless CEO of Thorne Capital, believed that because the waitress pouring his Chateau Margaux wore a uniform, she was invisible. He leaned over to his business partner and whispered a disgusting, arrogant insult in a specific dialect of Arabic, a language he was sure this peasant wouldn't understand. He smirked, waiting for the laugh, but he didn't get a laugh. He got a response, in perfect, flawless Arabic. What happened in the next 5 minutes didn't just ruin his dinner, it unraveled a billion-dollar criminal conspiracy and destroyed his life. This is the story of the mistake that cost a billionaire everything. The Gilded Lily was the kind of restaurant where the air conditioning smelled like vanilla and old money. Located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, it was a sanctuary for the 1% of the 1%. It was a place where a bottle of wine cost more than a Honda Civic, and the napkins were made of Egyptian cotton, thicker than most people's bed sheets. For Sarah Jenkins, it was a minefield. Sarah was 26, with chestnut hair pulled back into a severe regulation bun, and a uniform that was 2 sizes too big for her slight frame. To the patrons of the Gilded Lily, she wasn't Sarah. She was Miss, or usually, just a floating hand delivering a plate. She was part of the furniture, functional and invisible. That was exactly how she needed it to be. "Table 4 is yours, Sarah," the floor manager, Henri, hissed, snapping his fingers near her ear. Henri was a short man with a Napoleonic complex and a toupee that looked like a frightened squirrel. "And for the love of God, don't mess this up. It's Julian Thorne." Sarah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Julian Thorne. Even if you didn't follow the stock market, you knew the name. The face of Thorne Capital, the man who had bought up half of the affordable housing in Brooklyn, only to evict the tenants and build luxury condos. He was known in the tabloids for 2 things: his aggressive hostile takeovers and his temper. "I've got it, Henri," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her apron. "He's requested the 82 Latour. Decant it at the table. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact for longer than a second. He hates being stared at by the help." "I know the drill," Sarah murmured, picking up the heavy crystal decanter. She walked out onto the floor, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of her sensible black shoes. The restaurant was buzzing with the low hum of power brokering. Men in $5,000 suits laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, while women with diamonds heavy enough to bruise their collarbones picked at salads. Table 4 was the prime spot, the corner booth with the view of the skyline. Julian Thorne sat there like a king on a throne. He was younger than he looked in the magazines, maybe late 30s, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that looked dead inside. He wasn't alone. Sitting opposite him was a man Sarah recognized immediately, though not from the tabloids. He was older, with olive skin and a weary expression. This was Omar Al-Fayed, a representative for a massive sovereign wealth fund from the Gulf. Sarah approached the table, the bottle of Chateau Latour cradled in her arm like an infant. "Gentlemen," she said softly. Julian didn't look up. He was busy typing on his phone, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. "Just pour it," he said, waving a hand dismissively without breaking his gaze from the screen. "And try not to spill it. That bottle is worth more than your education." Sarah bit the inside of her cheek. "Breathe," she told herself. "Rent is due on Tuesday. Mum's medication isn't covered by insurance. You need this tip." "Of course, sir," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She began the ritual, the foil cut, the cork extraction, the slow pour into the decanter to separate the sediment. It was a dance she had perfected over 3 years of working doubles. As the wine aerated, Julian finally put his phone down and looked at Omar. "The deal needs to close by Friday, Omar," Julian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "The zoning permits are a formality. I have the mayor in my pocket. Once we demolish the community centre, the land value triples." Omar looked uncomfortable. He took a sip of water. "Julian, there are concerns. The community centre is a historical landmark. The protests are growing. My investors do not like bad press." Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Press? I buy the press. Look, don't worry about the noise. The people don't matter. They're ants. We step on them, we move on. By the time they realize the building is gone, we'll have the foundation poured for the Thorne Tower." Sarah was pouring the wine into Julian's glass now. Her hand didn't shake, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She knew that community centre. It was where her mother used to teach English as a second language. It was where Sarah had taken art classes as a kid before everything went wrong. She finished pouring and took a half step back, waiting to see if they required anything else. "Leave the bottle," Julian commanded, still not looking at her. "And get lost. We have business." Sarah nodded and turned to leave. That was when it happened. As she turned, her apron string caught the edge of the bread basket on the table. It was a tiny movement, a clumsy accident born of exhaustion. The basket didn't fall, but a single breadstick tumbled out and rolled onto the pristine white tablecloth. Julian stopped talking. The silence at the table was sudden and violent. He looked at the breadstick. Then he looked at Sarah. "I am so sorry, sir," Sarah said, reaching out to quickly remove the offending item with her service tongs. "I'll replace that immediately." Julian grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight, painful. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her hand, his expression one of pure disgust. "Don't touch it," he sneered. "You've contaminated the table enough." He released her hand as if she were diseased. He looked at Omar, rolling his eyes, and then a cruel smirk played on his lips. He leaned forward, switching languages instantly. He spoke in Arabic, not the formal Arabic used in news broadcasts, but a very specific, slang-heavy dialect used in the darker corners of business dealings in the Levant, a dialect he assumed no white, American waitress in New York City could possibly comprehend. "Look at this cow," Julian said in Arabic to Omar, gesturing at Sarah with his wine glass. "She has the grace of a donkey and the face of a tragedy. I bet she goes home to a trailer park and dreams of me." Omar looked down at his plate, embarrassed. "Julian, please. She is just doing her job." Julian laughed again, still in Arabic. "Job? This isn't a job. This is charity. I should have her fired just for breathing my air. But look at her standing there, dumb as a rock. She thinks I'm complimenting her. These people are sheep, Omar. That's why we shear them." Sarah stood frozen. To Julian, she looked like a deer in headlights, a terrified minimum wage worker confused by a foreign language. He didn't see the slight tightening of her jaw. He didn't see the way her pupils contracted. Julian turned back to her, switching to English, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "I said get lost. Or do you need me to draw you a map?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time all night, she made direct eye contact. She didn't move. "Are you deaf?" Julian snapped. "I said go." Sarah took a deep breath. She smoothed the front of her apron. And then she opened her mouth. The sounds that came out of Sarah's mouth were not English. They were Arabic. But it wasn't just Arabic. It was the exact same dialect Julian had just used. The street-smart, rhythmic cadence of the Levant, but polished with an academic precision that cut through the noise of the restaurant like a scalpel. "A donkey carries the weight of the world, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said softly, her Arabic flawless, her accent indistinguishable from a native speaker. "And a cow provides milk to nourish the strong. But a snake? A snake only has its poison, and eventually it bites its own tail." The silence that fell over table 4 was heavier than lead. Julian Thorne froze. The glass of Chateau Latour stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide, the arrogance draining out of his face so fast it looked like he was having a stroke. Omar Al-Fayed dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china, but nobody noticed. Sarah wasn't finished. She continued, still in Arabic, her voice raising just enough to be heard by the nearby tables, though they wouldn't understand the words, only the tone of absolute authority. "You assume that because I serve your food, I am beneath you. You assume that because I wear this uniform, I have no mind. But intelligence, Mr. Thorne, is not defined by your bank account. And manners? Manners are free. It is a shame you cannot afford them." Julian sat there, his mouth slightly open. His brain was misfiring. This wasn't possible. The waitress? The girl with the tired eyes and the cheap shoes? "Who the hell are you?" Julian whispered in English, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and shock. Sarah switched back to English effortlessly. Her posture changed. She was no longer the invisible servant. She stood tall, her chin raised. "I'm the person checking on your table, sir," she said, her voice dripping with icy professionalism. "Would you like fresh bread? Or perhaps the manager?" Julian slammed his hand onto the table, causing the wine glasses to jump. "You listen to me, you little—" "Is there a problem here?" Henry, the manager, materialized out of the ether. He had sensed the disturbance in the force. He looked from Julian's purple face to Sarah's calm demeanor. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry," Henry groveled, practically bowing. "Has this girl bothered you? Sarah, what did you do?" "She insulted me," Julian roared, standing up. He was a tall man, used to using his height to intimidate, but Sarah didn't flinch. "She threatened me. In a foreign language." Henry looked at Sarah, horror in his eyes. "Sarah? Is this true?" "I merely responded to the gentleman's comments," Sarah said calmly. "He seemed to want to discuss livestock. I simply joined the conversation." "You're fired," Henry snapped immediately. "Get out, now. Don't even clock out. Just go." "Henri, wait," Sarah started. "Now!" Henri screamed. He turned back to Julian, wringing his hands. "Mr. Thorne, please, accept my deepest apologies. The meal is on the house. We will—" "I don't want a free meal," Julian spat, adjusting his suit jacket. He glared at Sarah with pure venom. "I want her blacklisted. I want to make sure she never works in this city again. Do you hear me?" Sarah untied her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the empty chair next to Julian. "You don't have to blacklist me, Julian," she said, using his first name. It felt like a slap. "I quit." She looked at Omar, who was staring at her with a strange expression. Not anger, but recognition. Deep, puzzled recognition. "Enjoy the lamb, Mr. Al-Fayed," she said to him in Arabic. "Be careful who you sign contracts with. The foundation of the Thorne Tower is built on sand." She turned on her heel and walked away. She walked past the stunned diners, past the open kitchen, and out the heavy oak doors onto Fifth Avenue. The cold night air hit her face, cooling the flush of adrenaline. Her hands were shaking violently now. She had done it. She had lost her job. The job that paid for the apartment. The job that paid for the specialized nursing home her mother was in. She leaned against the brick wall of the restaurant alleyway and slid down until she was crouching on the pavement. She buried her face in her hands. "Stupid," she whispered to herself. "Stupid, stupid pride." She had roughly $400 in her bank account. Rent was $2,000. She was screwed. But then, the heavy metal door of the service entrance banged open. Sarah looked up, expecting Henri coming to scream at her some more. It wasn't Henri. It was a man in a dark trench coat, smoking a cigarette. He had been standing near the valet stand, watching the windows. He had seen the commotion. He walked over to Sarah, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He had a scruffy beard and eyes that darted around like a paranoia victim. "That was quite a show," the man said. His voice was raspy. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, standing up. "I don't have any change. Sorry." "I don't want money," the man said. He flicked his cigarette away. "I read lips. I saw what happened in there through the window. You speak Levantine Arabic, and you know about the Thorne Tower Foundation." Sarah froze. She took a step back, her back hitting the brick wall. "Who are you?" The man reached into his coat pocket. Sarah tensed, ready to run, but he pulled out a crumpled business card. "My name is David Miller. I used to be an investigative journalist for the Chronicle until Thorne sued my paper into bankruptcy." He held out the card. "I've been trying to nail Julian Thorne for 3 years. I have the pieces, but I don't have the translation. I don't have the inside track." He looked at her intensely. "You understood what he said to Al-Fayed. That means you know what he's hiding." Sarah looked at the card. David Miller. Freelance. "I'm just a waitress," Sarah said defensively. "No," David said, shaking his head. "Waitresses don't speak that dialect unless they've lived in Beirut or Damascus, and they definitely don't quote proverbs to billionaires. Who are you, really?" Sarah hesitated. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had nothing left to lose. Julian Thorne had just promised to destroy her life. Maybe it was time to strike first. "My name is Sarah," she said quietly. "And my father was the US ambassador to Lebanon before he was murdered. And Julian Thorne, he was the last person to see him alive." David's eyes went wide. The Jenkins assassination? That was 12 years ago. Everyone said it was insurgents. "Everyone lied," Sarah said. Just then, the front door of the restaurant burst open again. Julian Thorne marched out, phone to his ear, his face red with rage. He was shouting at someone on the other end. "Find out who she is! I want her name, her address, her social security number. I want her crushed." He looked around wildly, spotting Sarah in the alleyway. He pointed a finger at her. You think you can walk away? You have no idea who you just messed with." Sarah looked at Julian. Then she looked at David. She reached out and took David's card. "Get me out of here," she said to the journalist, "and turn on your recorder. I have a story to tell." David Miller's car was a rusted 2014 Ford Focus that smelled of stale tobacco and anxiety. As he peeled out of the alleyway, tires screeching against the asphalt, Sarah gripped the "Oh Jesus" handle above the passenger door, her knuckles white. "Keep your head down," David barked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Thorne has private security on payroll that makes the Secret Service look like mall cops. If he wants you found, he'll have your face on every surveillance screen in the city within an hour." Sarah didn't duck. She stared out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. "He already knows who I am, or at least he will as soon as he runs my file." "You said your father was Ambassador Jenkins," David said, taking a sharp left turn onto a side street in Hell's Kitchen. "Robert Jenkins. He was killed in a car bombing in Beirut 12 years ago. Official report said it was a radical splinter cell. It wasn't a cell, Sarah said, her voice hollow. It was a clean-up crew. They drove in silence until they reached a nondescript walk-up building in Queens. David hurried her inside, past a broken buzzer and up 3 flights of stairs to an apartment that looked more like a bunker than a home. Stacks of newspapers lined the walls. A corkboard covered in red string and blurry photographs dominated the living room. "Welcome to the headquarters of the Resistance," David muttered, locking the door with 3 separate deadbolts. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "Okay, we're safe for a minute. Talk to me. Why is a diplomat's daughter waiting tables at the Gilded Lily?" Sarah sat on a wobbly wooden chair, her hand still shaking slightly. "Because when my father died, his assets were frozen. Investigation pending, they said. Then the scandal hit. Fabricated evidence that he was selling state secrets. The government stripped us of everything. My mother..." The shock broke her. She had a stroke a month after the funeral. I was 14. I went into the foster system until I aged out. I've been working under the radar ever since, paying for her care. David pulled a beer out of a mini-fridge and offered it to her. She declined. "And Thorne?" David asked, cracking the tab. "Where does he fit in?" "Thorne wasn't a CEO back then," Sarah said, her eyes darkening. "He was a contractor, a fixer for American business interests in the Middle East. The night before my father died, he came to the embassy residence for dinner. I was supposed to be in bed, but I was sneaking around the vents. I like to spy on the adults. I heard them arguing." David grabbed a notepad. "What were they arguing about?" "A construction project," Sarah recalled, the memory as vivid as a photograph. "Thorne wanted my father to sign off on a massive infrastructure deal, a pipeline. My father refused. He said, 'I won't let you build a graveyard and call it progress.' Thorne told him that progress requires sacrifice. The next morning, my father's car exploded." David let out a low whistle. "And now, 12 years later, you're pouring his wine." "I didn't plan it," Sarah said. "It was just a job. But when I heard him speak that dialect tonight, it brought it all back. The arrogance, the cruelty." "You said something to him," David pressed, "about the foundation being built on sand. Was that just poetry? Or do you know something?" Sarah looked at David, her gaze steady. "It wasn't poetry. When he was whispering to Omar Al-Fayed tonight, he wasn't just insulting me. He was bragging. He told Al-Fayed, 'The concrete is already mixed. By the time they find the bones, the tower will be 50 stories high.'" David dropped his pen. "Bones? Literal bones." "I don't think he meant chicken wings, David. He's building the Thorne Tower on top of something he doesn't want found." He mentioned the old Dutch tunnels under the community center. David rushed to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "The old Dutch tunnels. Those are rum-running tunnels from the Prohibition era. They've been sealed up for 80 years. If Thorne is digging there..." "He's not just digging," Sarah realized, the pieces clicking together. "He's hiding something, or he's destroying evidence. That community center is the only thing standing in his way. If he demolishes it, he controls the access points." David's screen lit up with a map of the Upper East Side. He overlaid a blueprint from the city archives. "Holy hell, you're right. The foundation of the proposed tower cuts directly through the main artery of the tunnel system. If he pours concrete there, he seals it forever." "What is he hiding down there?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," David said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "But if Julian Thorne is terrified of a waitress, it must be worth a fortune. Or a life sentence." Suddenly, David's computer let out a sharp ping. A red alert box popped up on the screen. "What is that?" Sarah asked. "I have a police scanner algorithm running in the background," David said, his face paling. "It flags keywords." "What keyword?" "Your name," David said. "Sarah Jenkins. An APB just went out. Wanted for questioning regarding an attempted assault and grand larceny at the Gilded Lily." "Larceny?" Sarah gasped. "I didn't steal anything." "Thorne works fast," David said, grabbing his jacket. "He's framing you. He's claiming you stole a watch worth 200 grand. If the cops pick you up, you won't make it to a jail cell. You'll have an accident in the holding car." "My mother," Sarah whispered, horror washing over her. "The nursing home. They have my contact info on file." David grabbed her arm. "We can't go there. It's the first place they'll look." "I have to warn them," Sarah cried, pulling out her cheap burner phone. "Don't turn that on," David shouted. But he was too late. Sarah had powered up the phone. Almost instantly, it began to ring. The caller ID didn't say, "Mum." It said, "Unknown number." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at David. He shook his head frantically, mouthing, "No." She answered it anyway. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. "Hello, Sarah," Julian Thorne said. "Or should I say, Miss Jenkins? I must admit, I didn't make the connection until my security team pulled the old diplomatic files. You have your father's eyes." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Leave my mother out of this." "Your mother is a lovely woman," Julian purred. "I'm looking at her right now. She's sleeping quite peacefully. Room 304, Greenbrier Care Facility. The security here is shockingly lax." Sarah screamed into the phone. "If you touch her, I will kill you." "Such hostility," Julian tutted. "And in English, too. I prefer your Arabic. Listen carefully, Sarah. You have something I need." Silence. "You are going to walk into the nearest police precinct and turn yourself in for the theft of my watch. You will plead guilty. You will go to prison for a few years. And in exchange, your mother continues to receive her care. And if I don't, then I withdraw my generous donation to the facility," Julian said coldly. "And I might accidentally trip over her ventilator cord on my way out. You have 1 hour." The line went dead. Sarah stood in the middle of the cluttered apartment, the phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering to the floor. The silence in the room was deafening. "He's there," she whispered. "He's at the nursing home." David picked up the phone and popped the back off, ripping out the battery and SIM card. "He's not going to hurt her yet. He needs leverage. If he kills her, he loses his hold on you." "You don't know him," Sarah snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "He killed my father for a pipeline. He'll kill my mother for a parking lot." She moved toward the door. "I have to go. I have to surrender." David stepped in front of her, blocking the exit. He was not a big man, but he held his ground. "If you surrender, you're dead. You think he'll let you live in prison? He'll have you shanked in the shower within a week, and then your mum dies anyway because there's no one left to protect her." "So what do I do?" Sarah yelled, shoving him. "I can't just sit here." "We go on the offensive," David said, his eyes hard. "He gave you an hour. That means he's distracted for an hour. He's focused on the nursing home." So his guard is down somewhere else," David said. He turned back to the conspiracy board. "The Gilded Lily. He was having dinner with Omar Al-Fayed. The deal hasn't closed yet. Julian needs Omar's signature on Friday." "What good does that do me?" "Omar Al-Fayed is an honorable man," Sarah said slowly, the gears in her mind turning. "He's a traditionalist. He looked disgusted when Julian insulted me. He only stayed because business is business. But if he knew what? David asked. If he knew Julian was insulting him too, Sarah said. David looked confused. He wasn't insulting Omar. He was insulting you. No, Sarah corrected, her eyes widening as she recalled the exact phrasing. In the dialect Julian used. He used a specific phrase when referring to the deal. He said to Omar, "We will shear the sheep." But later, when he was ranting, he called Omar the camel who carries the gold. Is that bad? It's not just an insult, Sarah explained rapidly. In the Gulf business dialect, calling a partner a camel implies they are a beast of burden, stupid, slow, and meant to be used until they collapse. But more importantly, Julian mentioned the double-blind trust. He whispered it to Omar when the wine was being poured. He said, "The double-blind protects us both." Standard corporate structure, David shrugged. No, Sarah said. My father talked about the double-blind. It's a specific illegal setup used to funnel kickbacks to terrorist organizations disguised as charities. If Omar al-Fayed's sovereign fund is caught in a double-blind, the US government will freeze all their assets. It would be an act of war. Julian is trying to trick Omar into signing a death warrant for his own country's economy. David stared at her. If you can prove that to Omar. He walks away, Sarah said. The deal collapses. Julian's stock tanks. The Thorne Tower project dies. But we need proof, David said. We can't just call Omar and say, "Trust me." Sarah looked at the clock on the wall. 45 minutes left. I know where Omar is staying, Sarah said. The Pierre Hotel, the Royal Suite. He always stays there. You can't get into the Pierre, David said. You're a wanted fugitive, remember? Sarah walked over to a pile of David's old clothes in the corner. She picked up a baseball cap and a heavy wool coat. I'm not going in as Sarah Jenkins, she said. She grabbed a pair of scissors from David's desk. What are you doing? David asked. Sarah gathered her long chestnut hair in one hand. Julian is looking for a waitress with a bun and a uniform. Snip. A thick lock of hair fell to the floor. Sarah hacked away at her hair until it was a choppy, chin-length bob. She rubbed some dirt from a plant pot on her face, darkening her skin, and pulled the cap low. I need a laptop, Sarah said, and I need you to create a diversion at the nursing home. Call the fire department. Call the bomb squad. Get Julian's men out of there. David grinned. Now you're talking like a journalist. No, Sarah said, pulling the oversized coat on. I'm talking like a diplomat. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into the lobby of the Pierre. She didn't look like a waitress. With the coat, the cap, and the confident stride, she looked like one of the eccentric tech millionaires who frequented the hotel bar. She kept her head down, bypassing the front desk and heading straight for the elevators. Excuse me, miss. A security guard stepped forward. Keycard. Sarah froze. She didn't have one. I'm meeting my father, she said, pitching her voice lower, adding a slight rasp. Mr. Al-Fayed. He's expecting me. The guard hesitated. Mr. Al-Fayed. He didn't mention a daughter. He doesn't like to advertise me, Sarah said, improvising. She switched to flawless, formal Arabic, the kind used by royalty. Do you wish to be the one to tell him his daughter was left standing in the lobby like a beggar? Or shall I tell him myself? The guard didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of someone who signed checks. Go ahead, Mum. Penthouse floor. Sarah stepped into the elevator. She watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. She had one chance. If she failed, her mother died. If she succeeded, she started a war with a billionaire. The elevator doors pinged open. Two massive bodyguards stood outside the suite double doors. They were far more serious than the hotel security. They had earpieces and bulges under their jackets. Sarah stepped out. She held her hands up, empty. "I need to speak to Omar Al-Fayed," she said in English. "Mr. Al-Fayed is not seeing visitors," the guard on the left grunted. "Leave now." "Tell him it's the waitress from the Gilded Lily," Sarah said. "Tell him I know what a double-blind is." The guards exchanged a look. One of them touched his earpiece. He murmured something into his lapel. A pause. Then he looked back at Sarah with confused eyes. "He says to let her in." The heavy doors swung open. The suite was expansive, overlooking Central Park. Omar Al-Fayed was sitting on a velvet sofa, a cup of tea in his hand. He looked tired. He looked up as Sarah entered. He studied her chopped hair, her dirty coat. "You are a brave woman," Omar said quietly. "Or a foolish one. Julian Thorne has the police looking for you." "Julian Thorne is a liar," Sarah said, walking to the center of the room. "And if you sign that contract on Friday, you will be an accessory to treason." Omar put his tea down. "Those are heavy words for a server." "I am the daughter of Robert Jenkins," Sarah declared, "and I am here to save your life." Omar's eyes widened. "Robert, I knew him. A good man." He paused, his face hardening. "But Julian is my partner. He claims you are mentally unstable. Why should I listen to you?" "Because," Sarah said, pulling a folded napkin from her pocket, the only thing she had managed to take from the restaurant. "Because Julian thinks you are a camel, and I can prove he's stealing from you." "Show me," Omar commanded. "I don't have the papers," Sarah said, "but I know where they are. They are in his private server, and I know the password." Omar raised an eyebrow. "You know his password?" "He typed it into his phone at dinner," Sarah said. "He thinks I'm invisible, so he didn't hide the screen. He uses a pattern. I memorized it." "And what do you want from me?" "Get me into his office," Sarah said. "Get me into Thorne Capital tonight. Use your access as a partner. Get me to his terminal. I will find the double-blind file. If I'm wrong, you can hand me over to the police yourself. But if I'm right—" Omar stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city. "If you are right," Omar said darkly, "then Julian Thorne has insulted my honor. And for that, there is no forgiveness." He turned back to Sarah. "Let's go." Thorne Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a shard of black obsidian. It was 50 stories of ego wrapped in steel and glass. At 1 a.m., the lobby was a cavern of silence, guarded by 3 men at a circular marble desk who looked more like mercenaries than concierges. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door, and Omar Al-Fayed stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked every inch the billionaire investor, impatient, powerful, and utterly entitled. Trailing a step behind him was Sarah. She wore a spare, oversized blazer Omar had in his car, and her new, jagged haircut was hidden under a fedora he had borrowed from his driver. She carried a leather briefcase, her head bowed, playing the role of the exhausted personal assistant. They approached the desk. The head guard, a man with a neck thick as a tree trunk, stood up. "Mr. Al-Fayed," the guard said, checking a tablet. "We weren't expecting you. Mr. Thorne isn't in the building." "I am aware," Omar said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Mr. Thorne and I have a discrepancy in the contract regarding the zoning permits. I need to review the physical blueprints in his office before the Asian markets open. Unless you want to explain to your boss why he lost a $4 billion deal because you wouldn't let me look at a piece of paper?" The guard hesitated. "I need to call Mr. Thorne for authorization." "Call him," Omar challenged. "Wake him up. Tell him Omar Al-Fayed is here. And when he screams at you for waking him up over a zoning issue, He assured me was resolved. I will be sure to remember your name. The guard looked at the phone. He looked at Omar's furious expression. He weighed his options. That won't be necessary, sir, the guard muttered, swiping a pass card. Express elevator is unlocked. 50th floor. Come, Omar snapped at Sarah. They walked to the elevators, Sarah's heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. As the doors closed, she let out a shaky breath. You are a good actor, she whispered. I am not acting, Omar said grimly. I am angry. If what you say is true, he has played me for a fool. The elevator rocketed upward. When we get in, Sarah said, checking the burner phone David had given her. We have to be fast. David is monitoring the network traffic from his apartment. He says if we trip a silent alarm, we have less than 3 minutes before the NYPD, or worse, Thorne's private cleaners, show up. The doors slid open. Julian Thorne's office was a testament to narcissism. It was the entire top floor, featuring a desk made of a single slab of meteorite and a panoramic view of the city he was trying to conquer. Sarah rushed to the computer terminal behind the desk. It was locked, the screen displaying a prompt for a biometric scan or a passcode. It needs a fingerprint, Sarah hissed. We're dead. Think, Omar urged. You said you saw him type something. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the dinner. She saw Julian's hand. He hadn't just tapped numbers. He had swiped his finger in a specific geometry. It wasn't a number. It was a shape. He didn't type a code, Sarah realized. He drew a constellation. She looked at the keypad. Julian was obsessed with legacy, with destiny. Orion, she whispered. The hunter. She traced the shape of the Orion constellation on the touchscreen keypad. Star, star, belt, sword. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I'm in, Sarah cried. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. David said to look for a directory labeled Janus. That's the shell company. She searched the drive. Nothing. It's not here. Panic rose in her voice. He must have renamed it. Search for the Gilded Lily, Omar suggested. Or the Foundation. Sarah typed, Foundation. A folder appeared. Project Bedrock. Archive. She clicked it. Hundreds of files spilled out. Blueprints, bank transfers, bribed city official lists. And there, at the bottom, was a subfolder titled Double Blind, Al-Fade Trust. He has it, Sarah gasped. Look. She opened a document. It was a wire transfer schedule. It showed millions of dollars being siphoned from Omar's investment fund, routed through a charity for historical preservation, and then funneled directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a known arms dealer. Omar leaned over her shoulder, reading the screen. His face turned a terrifying shade of grey. He is using my money to fund a militia, Omar whispered. He is using my family's name to wash blood money. And here, Sarah said, clicking another file, the blueprints. The map of the community centre appeared. Underneath the building, clearly marked in red, were the old Dutch tunnels. But they weren't labelled tunnels. They were labelled Storage Facility B, Hazmat. He's not just hiding bodies, Sarah said, her stomach churning. He's storing chemical waste down there, illegal industrial runoff from his factories in Jersey. He's dumping it under a school and building a tower on top to seal it in. If that leaks, it kills the neighborhood, Omar finished. We have to copy this, Sarah said, jamming a USB drive into the port. The progress bar appeared. 20%, 30%. Suddenly, the lights in the office turned red. A siren began to wail, a low, mechanical drone that vibrated in their teeth. Silent alarm, Sarah said. We triggered a data breach alert. How much time? Omar asked. None, a voice came from the doorway. Sarah and Omar spun around. Standing in the entrance of the office was not a security guard. It was Julian Thorne. He was still wearing his dinner suit, though the tie was undone. He held a silver pistol in his hand, casually, as if it were a remote control. Flanking him were two men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. "I have to admit," Julian said, stepping into the room, "I underestimated the waitress. You got further than the journalist did 3 years ago. I had to break his fingers to get him to stop typing. What will I have to break of yours, Sarah?" Sarah stood in front of the computer, shielding the USB drive with her body. The download bar was at 85%. "You knew," Omar said, his voice shaking with rage. "You knew we were coming." "Omar, please," Julian sighed, walking over to the wet bar and pouring himself a drink with his free hand, keeping the gun trained on them. "I have trackers on all my partners' vehicles, insurance. When I saw your limo detour to Queens to pick up a fugitive, and then head here, well, the math wasn't hard to do." "You are a monster," Omar spat. "You are funding terrorists with my money. You are poisoning this city." "I am a businessman," Julian roared, his calm facade cracking for a second. "I am building a legacy. Do you think the Rockefellers were saints? Do you think the Vanderbilts didn't break a few eggs? I am doing what needs to be done to secure the future." "By murdering a diplomat?" Sarah spoke up. Her voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been. "You killed my father." Julian laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Your father was a roadblock, just like that community center. He wanted to play moral guardian in a world that runs on oil and steel. I offered him a cut. He threatened to expose me. He made his choice." "And my mother?" Sarah asked. "Is she a roadblock too?" "She's leverage," Julian said. "Or she was. But now that you're here, I don't really need her, do I?" He checked his watch. "Here is the situation. In about 5 minutes, the police will arrive. But they won't find a billionaire running an illegal chemical dump. They will find a tragedy, a business dispute gone wrong. Mr. Al-Fayed, distraught over his failing investments, broke into my office. He shot me, grazed my shoulder, tragic really, and then he turned the gun on his mistress, the disgruntled waitress, before taking his own life." Julian smiled. "The narrative writes itself. The press will eat it up." "You cannot kill me," Omar said, standing tall. "I am a diplomat. I have immunity." "In this room," Julian said, raising the gun, "the only immunity is the one holding the weapon." Ping. The computer behind Sarah chimed. "Download complete." Sarah pulled the USB drive out. "It's over, Julian," Sarah said. "Give me the drive," Julian commanded, "and I might make it quick." Sarah held the tiny silver drive up. "You think this is the only copy?" "It's an air-gapped terminal," Julian scoffed. "You couldn't have emailed it. You have nowhere to send it." Sarah smiled. It was the same smile she had given him at the restaurant, the smile of someone who knew something he didn't. "I didn't email it," Sarah said. "I broadcasted it." Julian frowned. "What?" "David Miller," Sarah said. "He's not just a journalist. He's a hacker. When I plugged this drive in, it didn't just copy files, it created a bridge. David has been live streaming your desktop for the last 5 minutes. Julian's face went white. He looked at the webcam on top of his monitor. The little green light was on. "You're lying," Julian whispered. "Say hello to YouTube, Julian," Sarah said. "We're live. 40,000 viewers and climbing. They just heard you confess to murdering my father. They just heard you admit to the chemical dump." Julian stared at the camera. Then he stared at Sarah. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a trapped animal. "Turn it off!" Julian screamed. "Turn it off!" He lunged at the computer. "Now!" Sarah shouted. Omar didn't hesitate. He wasn't a fighter, but he was heavy. He tackled Julian around the waist, slamming him into the meteorite desk. The gun skittered across the floor. "Get the gun, Sarah," Omar yelled, grappling with the younger, stronger man. Sarah dove for the pistol. She scrambled on the polished floor, her fingers brushing the cold steel. One of Julian's bodyguards moved to intercept her. He was huge, moving with terrifying speed. He raised a boot to stomp on her hand. Crash! The floor-to-ceiling glass window of the office exploded inward. A drone, a heavy industrial camera drone, smashed through the glass, showering the room in shards. It hovered there, buzzing like a giant hornet. Ideally, this would be the police. But it wasn't. The distraction, however, was enough. Sarah grabbed the gun. She rolled onto her back and pointed it at the bodyguard. "Back off!" she screamed. "I swear to God, I will shoot." The bodyguard froze. Julian threw Omar off him and scrambled to his feet, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked at Sarah, then at the gun, then at the drone hovering in the broken window. "You ruined everything," Julian hissed, his eyes wild. "You filthy little peasant." "I'm not a peasant," Sarah said, her voice trembling but fierce. She stood up, aiming the gun directly at Julian's chest. "And I'm not a waitress. I'm the woman who just brought you down." Sirens. Real sirens this time. Not the building alarm, but the wail of emergency vehicles rising up from the streets below. "They're coming for you, Julian," Sarah said. "Not for us. David sent the stream to the FBI, not the NYPD. Your payroll cops can't help you now." Julian looked at the door. He looked at the window. He realized he had nowhere to go. He straightened his jacket. He wiped the blood from his face. The mask of the CEO slid back into place, cracked but functional. "It doesn't matter," Julian sneered. "I have the best lawyers in the world. I'll be out on bail by breakfast. And then I will hunt you down." Sarah lowered the gun slightly. "You won't be out by breakfast," she said softly. "Why?" Julian challenged. "Because," Sarah said, switching to Arabic, the same dialect, the same tone he had used to insult her. "Because a snake that bites its own tail eventually swallows itself. Check your phone, Mr. Thorne." Julian frowned. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was blowing up with notifications, but not from lawyers. Stock alert. Thorne Capital crashes 40% in after-hours trading. Breaking news. Sovereign Wealth Fund freezes all assets linked to Thorne. DOJ alert. Federal warrant issued. But the last notification was the one that made him drop the phone. It was a text from his own board of directors. "You are terminated. Effective immediately. The building is in lockdown. Do not attempt to leave." Julian Thorne looked up. For the first time, he looked small. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I served you," Sarah said. "Just like you asked." The elevator doors pinged open. A dozen agents in FBI windbreakers swarmed into the room, weapons drawn. "Federal agents, drop the weapon. Hands in the air." Sarah placed the gun gently on the floor. She raised her hands. She looked at Omar, who was bruising and out of breath, but smiling. They watched as the agents bypassed them and tackled Julian Thorne, slamming the billionaire face first onto the expensive carpet he loved so much. As they cuffed him, Julian twisted his head to look at Sarah one last time. "You're nobody!" he screamed as they dragged him away. "You're a nobody!" Sarah didn't answer. She walked over to the broken window and looked out at the city. The cold wind whipped her face. It was over. Or so she thought. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the broken glass of the Thorne Tower in shades of pink and orange. The office was a crime scene now, taped off and swarming with forensics teams. Sarah sat on the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over her shoulders. A paramedic was checking her blood pressure. She watched as David Miller ran past the police line, waving his press badge, a grin plastered on his face that threatened to split his lip. He had the scoop of the century. His career was back. Omar Al-Fayed approached her. He had cleaned up, though his expensive suit was ruined. "The FBI has cleared us," Omar said softly. "Self-defense. And given the amount of evidence you just handed them, arms dealing, environmental terrorism, murder, I don't think they are interested in charging you with trespassing." Sarah nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion crash over her. "And the deal? The tower?" "The deal is dead," Omar said. "I have already spoken to my government. We are pulling all funding. The Thorne Tower will never be built. The community centre stays." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He handed it to her. Sarah looked at it. It was for an amount that made her breath hitch. It was enough to cover her mother's care for the rest of her life. It was enough to buy a house. It was enough to start over. "I cannot accept this," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It is not charity," Omar said firmly. "It is a consulting fee. You saved my country from a grave error, and you taught me a lesson about looking beneath the surface. Please, for your mother." Sarah looked at the check, tears stinging her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Omar." Omar bowed his head, a sign of deep respect. "May your path be paved with peace, Sarah Jenkins." 3 months later, the Gilded Lily was under new management. The previous manager, Henry, had been quietly let go after the scandal broke. Sarah sat at table 4, the corner booth with the view. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a tailored navy suit. Her hair was styled, her face bright. Across from her sat David Miller, whose book about the Thorne scandal was already hitting the bestseller list. A waiter approached the table. He was young, nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he held the wine list. Good evening," the waiter stammered. "Can I start you off with—" He fumbled the water pitcher, splashing a tiny drop onto the tablecloth near Sarah's hand. The boy froze, terror in his eyes, waiting to be yelled at. Sarah looked at the spot of water. Then she looked up at the terrified waiter. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "It happens to the best of us," Sarah said gently. "Don't worry about it. We're just happy to be here." The waiter let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. "Thank you, Mom." Sarah watched him walk away. She picked up her glass, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere in a federal supermax prison, Julian Thorne was sitting in a small concrete cell, realizing that no amount of money could buy him a way out of the silence. She had lost her father to the greed of men like Thorne, but she had found her voice. "To the invisible people," David said, raising his glass. Sarah clinked hers against his. "To the ones who listen," she replied. And that is the story of how one arrogant insult took down $1 billion empire. Julian Thorne thought his money made him untouchable. He thought he could treat people like dirt because they served him dinner. But he forgot the golden rule. You never know who you are talking to. He didn't just insult a waitress. He insulted a woman who had the skills, the knowledge, and the courage to bring his entire world crashing down. It's a powerful reminder that dignity isn't something you buy. It's something you have. And karma. Well, karma speaks every language. What do you think? Did Julian deserve what he got, or did Sarah go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more real-life dramas about justice served, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind. You never know who's listening.